Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Nerd Chatter Podcast, episode 18. Don is out this week. He had some teeth pulled, and it was kind of unpleasant, and he's not able to really talk this week. So this week, I have my wife, Ariana, joining us.
Hello.
How's your week?
It's been good.
Good. As always, we're going to talk about the free games. This week on the Epic Game Store until October 20th, we have Darkwood. It is a top-down indie survival horror game. Then also on the Epic Game Store until October 20th, we have Toe Jam and Earl, Back in the Groove. It is a top-down retro game, odd in both mechanics, story, and dialogue. Toe Jam definitely hints at that, you know.
Solid.
Yeah. And in gaming events, we have a whole bunch of Halloween related events going on, so bear with me as I go through all of these. There's quite a few. In Rainbow Six Siege, we have Doctor's Curse, Dead by Daylight, Haunted by Daylight, Fortnite, Fort of Nightmares, GTA 5, Judgment Day, PUBG, Dead by Daylight crossover, Red Dead Online, Halloween Pass, Warframe, Orokin Festival of Death, Black Desert Online, a Halloween event, World of Warcraft, Hollow's End, and there's a rumored Call of Duty Warzone Halloween event, then Animal Crossing New Horizons, Jack's Halloween event. So starting off our segments this week, we have our special guest, Ariana, and we're going to talk about Rings of Power. So, Ariana, tell us about your history with Lord of the Rings.
So, to start off, I love The Lord of the Rings. I grew up watching the 1977 version of The Hobbit. It's animated, has lots of songs. Once upon a time, I could sing all of those songs. And I remember when the movies first started coming out, my parents would talk about how awesome they were. At the time, I was a little too young, but by the time Return of the King came out, I was able to start actually watching them with my family. And I've read The Lord of the Rings several times, The Hobbit several times. I read The Silmarillion once or twice. Really, I've just really enjoyed it. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that when I went to college, I took a 5-credit literature elective on The Lord of the Rings. And that was an incredible experience. It was a lot of fun. We wrote essays. We read all 1,008 pages of the book and discussed different themes in it, different aspects of Tolkien's life and how what he studied and who he was played into the things he wrote. We talked about how the Silmarillion and some of those older stories played into and connected to the book as well.
Great. So, first off, let's just get some background information on the Rings of Power. So, how does it fit into the Lord of the Rings canon? Does it fit into the literary canon, movie canon? Is it its own thing?
It's kind of its own thing. It definitely feels like it exists in that world. And it is based on, inspired by some of those old stories from the Second Age in the Silmarillion and the Lost Tales. So, yeah, that's kind of a complicated question.
Okay. That's fine to have it be complicated. Are there familiar characters, locations in Rings of Power that are similar? So let's just start off with there. Are there familiar characters in Rings of Power?
Absolutely. So Galadriel plays a big part, Elrond plays a big part, and then there are names that come up that you read about in the Silmarillion. I don't know if everyone knows what the Silmarillion is, but it's a collection of stories that Tolkien wrote before he wrote The Lord of the Rings. It was edited by his son Christopher, and it is basically mythology. It's a background to The Lord of the Rings, to The Hobbit. It is something that he worked on throughout his life and made alterations to the stories. He added things, he took things away. It was definitely a work in progress throughout his life. And so some of those stories, those characters come up in the Rings of Power, in addition to some of those older elven lords that we meet in the Lord of the Rings.
So with the characters that we do get introduced to are familiar, how are they different?
The biggest thing is that they're just younger. There's a couple of things that are, I guess, important to know about Middle Earth and the way that it works. It's divided up into these 3 ages. And in the first age, there's a huge creation story, and there are gods and demigods, basically, the Valar, and the forming of Middle Earth. It's really, there's a lot of power in that. And in the second age, the elves are a little bit less powerful, but they're still incredibly powerful. There are some shapeshifters. There are some incredible craftsmen. There's just a lot of power and things that the elves and other beings can do. And by the third age, they become a lot less powerful. More, I wouldn't say normal like humans, but their power's just diminished quite a bit. And so the biggest difference that you see in Rings of Power versus the Lord of the Rings is that these Elrond and Galadriel are younger, and they're still kind of in their prime, I would say. And so the power of that world is so strong, still so much stronger. Whereas once we get into the Lord of the Rings, the age of elves is ending, it's coming to a close, and the age of men is really starting. So that, I would say, is the biggest difference.
Okay. What are the biggest similarities between those characters?
There aren't a lot of similarities that I've seen so far, except that they're developing. What's interesting that I have found about Galadriel is you can really see where some of the darkness comes from in her, especially when you think of that scene in The Lord of the Rings where Frodo offers her the ring and she says, in place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen. You can really see where some of that darkness comes from, where that interaction with evil has put that grain of darkness in her. And so it's been interesting as I've watched this first little bit of the show to see where that character arc might come in. Elrond, I would say, is totally different, and I'm really excited to see his character arc. He's really just a doll. He's so cute. He's so sweet in the Rings of Power, and he's really this brooding, sad old man in the Lord of the Rings, and so I'm really curious to see how that goes.
So you were talking about the ages. When does Rings of Power take place?
So Rings of Power takes place in the second age. It is after the creation, it's after the fall of Morgoth, who is the demigod, who's kind of the big baddie. And it's after he's been defeated, and Sauron, who was, I don't want to say his apprentice, but kind of his right-hand man, really comes into his own. And it's when the rings are created. That's why it's called Rings of Power. We haven't quite gotten to that point in the show yet. But there are a lot of really powerful things happening at this point. And it's before the decline of the elves. There's just a lot of things happening.
And it takes place in Middle-earth?
Ooh, good question. So, for the most part, it takes place in Middle-earth, but it definitely talks a lot about Valinor, or...
So, for the viewers who don't know what Valinor is, please explain.
So, Valinor is where creation happened. That is the place that was first created. That is where the elves came into being. That's where the demigods, the Valar, lived. And Middle Earth was kind of created after. And so there's this space between Valinor and that world, and Middle Earth and that world. There's ocean, there's sea that's between them, and the elves can travel back and forth to a point, but mortals are not able to do that. So while the story is taking place in Middle Earth, in the first episode where Galadriel and her cohort gets in the ship, they're sailing to Valinor, and she decides to get off and to go back to Middle Earth because she feels like her job's not done. She's not ready for the peace. She still has that darkness inside of her, and she has things she needs to do.
So another thing that we've talked about, I'm sorry I didn't prepare you for this. You talked about, in a previous discussion, about the orcs. That we see orcs in the Rings of Power, right? And yes, they don't look quite as similar as they do in Lord of the Rings. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so in the Lord of the Rings, there are a few different kinds of orcs. There are the goblins in Moria, that are Uruk-hai, that were created in Isengard, and there are the orcs that live in Mordor. And so you kind of got these different groups going on. And when you look at the orcs from Mordor, they're very bent. They're kind of green-gray. They're very twisted creatures. Whereas in the Rings of Power, I would say that they're equally ugly, but they're a lot more upright. They're a lot more fair. They have a different look to them. And my interpretation, my theory, is because their race is not as old. They're still a lot younger. And we get to meet one of those first, one of the first Uruks, whose name I'm totally spacing on, but he is one of those elves who was twisted and changed into an orc. That's the history behind orcs. They were initially elves who were changed, who were twisted, who were broken, and became these Uruks. And from the Uruks came all the other orcs. And so in Rings of Power, it's just interesting to see how the orcs are the same and different. They're the same broken, twisted, nasty, cruel creatures, but they're not as physically broken as they are in the Lord of the Rings.
Okay. So, I mean, you haven't really seen a lot of the commentary online about Rings of Power.
Which was deliberate.
Other than there's been a lot of negativity around it because there's, different people playing different characters, and it's not exactly what people were expecting on some fronts. What do you have to say?
I think that people get this picture in their mind, and this happens with Star Wars a lot too, where people
in Marvel and anything that people get attached to over time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. You get this picture in their head, like, this is what it is. This is the Lord of the Rings. This is Star Wars. This is what it is. And if it doesn't match with my vision, then it's not correct. And so I think that that's a big not a problem, but a big factor with the negativity is it's not exactly like the Lord of the Rings, and so it must not be right. I think a lot of people are also just not super familiar with the Silmarillion and with the Forgotten Tales and with those older stories, the mythology, and so they're not able to catch on to those callbacks and be like, oh, and be excited by them. Which is definitely something that I enjoy, even if they're not super in-depth. I'm like, oh, Arendelle, I kind of know who that is. I remember that name. And so getting some of those they're not Easter eggs, but those, like I said, those callbacks, those little
Connections.
Those connections.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is really fun. But going back to your question, people just get an idea in their head, and when it's not what they want, then they're not. When it's not what they're expecting, then they're not happy. And so I've really deliberately avoided reviews and articles. I've really been conscientious about that because I wanted to come into it fresh. I wanted to just watch the show and enjoy it and get my own opinion out of it without being jaded by whatever the internet was saying.
Very wise. So on that general note, I mean, you mentioned Star Wars, and I mentioned Marvel, and all these different, things that people tend to, or have grown accustomed to, and we can say the same thing about Star Trek, when the Kelvin universe came out in 2008, with J.J. Abrams' take on Star Trek, and, people get these ideas of things that they want set in stone of what they want. We've seen that with Star Wars, and I've definitely been guilty of holding on to certain things. Like, I don't like some of the sequel movies because of how they treat certain characters, but I'm open to the content. It's not like I'm shunning everything else out, and I feel like you're the same way. We've been married for almost 7 years, so we have that same frame of reference, if you will.
I totally agree. I was a little bit skeptical when I heard that the Rings of Power was in production. I'm like, oh man, well, I hope they do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I made a really deliberate choice to leave behind my preconceived notions and ideas of what it should be, so I could just enjoy it for what it is. And I've been really happy. I've been really impressed.
Yeah. And I've been, after all the sequels and everything with Star Wars for me, I've really decided to leave my preconceived notions out and just soak in the content and then render a verdict and see if I like it or not. So I've been really pleased with Mandalorian. You can't really go wrong with that show. And Boba Fett was okay. Wasn't the best. Mainly because they just shoehorned Mando season 2.5 in there. But Andor's been great. How do you feel about Andor?
Oh, it's been fantastic.
Yeah. We'll talk about it a little bit more in depth in the roundup. Moving on to segment 2. It's going to be kind of a short segment, but we're going to talk about lightsabers. So we have Halloween coming up in roughly 2 weeks. So everybody, may want to be a Jedi for Halloween this year, or maybe everyone wants to be a Jedi. Come on, it's the thing. So I just wanted to talk about a couple options to get lightsabers in a hurry 2 weeks out. Most of the time, especially when you get from high quality sellers, some of those might include like Padawan Outpost, Crimson Dawn, Dark Wolf, Vader's Vault, CC Sabers, Saber Forge, and many other saber manufacturers and custom manufacturers. However, they take time. You have a lightsaber in front of you.
This is my beautiful lightsaber that you, Garrett, created for me.
Well,
I love it.
I didn't create all of it. So the hilt we got from Saber Forge, right? Mm-hmm. And that took a couple weeks to get here. Then, relatively, a couple of years later, we were like, okay, it's time to put the insides in. Then it took a couple weeks to get all the parts in. But for the major manufacturers, or not manufacturers, but the builders of these lightsabers, and it takes time. So you can expect, I think Saber Forge is 8 to 12 week wait time after you place your order. Some of the others might be 2 to 3 weeks. So that's cutting it really close to Halloween. We're 2 weeks out. Real quick, Saberforge has a couple quick ship options, but they ship in 1 to 2 weeks, so it's kind of a gamble. There's not a lot of other sellers that have quick ship options, but I know you want to turn on your lightsaber, right?
I sure do.
Go ahead. Let everybody hear it. And swing it around a little bit. Yeah, and clash it. Yeah. So, there's lots of different options, and the specific stuff that we got for Ariana's lightsaber has a really nice soundboard on it, and
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
it's okay. So it has a really nice soundboard, and got a really nice speaker on it, and it can change to whatever color we choose. So we just have to program the card a little bit. So Zia Sabers, ZIA Sabers, has a. It's not exactly completely like Luke's Return of the Jedi lightsaber, but it's similar enough. It's inspired by. Most people probably won't be able to tell the difference. But for $320, actually $300 with a $20 coupon, you can get it to your door by October 19th. So, I mean, that's several days from now, but still before Halloween. And it's what's called Xenopixel. So the blade has all the lights in it and everything, and it can change. It has 12 specific preset colors and has some several different sound fonts in it. Next up, we have a Revan inspired hilt, also with the Xenopixel technology, for $230. There is a 5% coupon, and all of these will be linked in the description below. So please see our YouTube video or any other places that we'll have the links at. And that is from Custom Saber on Amazon. Next up, we have from the Kybers store on Amazon, we have a very basic, what's called in-hilt lighting, which is what you have in your lightsaber. It's really great for dueling, but there might be some inconsistency in how the blade is lit. However, these are cheaper. So this one includes 11 changeable colors with only 5 sound fonts instead of the changeable, 34 with the Revan one and 12 with the Luke one. So kind of low on the sound fonts, which is better than, one of those first lightsabers I made. It would probably be 6 or 7 years ago now. It only had 2 sound fonts on it. So still better than that. But so from the Kyber store, there's just a really plain looking black hilt for $99. From the Custom Saber store, again, we have the same Revan inspired hilt. However, it's the in-hilt lighting instead of the Xenopixel lighting, with 12 sound fonts for $150 with an $8 coupon. We have another Luke inspired hilt, but again, in-hilt lighting. And it'll be a little bit bulkier at the top there, just because you have to fit more in the little emitter at $230. Then we have another Luke inspired hilt, except it's a little bit more derivative, and it'll be a lot easier to hold because there's no control box on it. So better for dueling, $200. And last up, there is a company called YDD Saber. It's extremely basic looking lightsaber, nothing fancy about it, and it's one sound font to it, one color, really basic, but they're $80 and they'll be to your home by Thursday, October 20th, if you order today. So lots of options available to get lightsabers to in a hurry. I definitely recommend going the custom route if you have the time. There's great options on the market to get your favorite Jedi or Sith lightsaber. Moving on to the roundup. This week, Meta announced the Meta Quest Pro VR headset. Price is set at $1,500, and the new VR set features a smaller and lighter design than previous models. EA Sports PGA Tour trailer dropped, featuring swing animations that far exceed anything before it, including the current 2K series. Although not Tiger in the EA game, the course list is robust and features Augusta National. After the director Basim Tariq abruptly left production from Blade, Marvel has announced that all future slated films will suffer a delay because of that. All the new dates are as follows. Blade is set from, it was previously November 3rd of 2023, is now September 6th, 2024. Deadpool 3, September 6th, 2024 to November 8th, 2024. Fantastic Four, November 8th, 2024 to February 14th, 2025. Avengers Secret Wars, November 7th, 25 to May 1st, 2026. It's kind of disappointing, huh?
Yeah, but, I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah. Delays happen in movies, but, you know, at least for Blade, that's a year delay. Everything else is only a few months, relatively. I mean, other than Secret Wars, it's like 6 months. So hopefully they'll be able to find a good director to replace in Blade. I'm sure they've already found one. Dwayne Johnson. Do you know who Dwayne Johnson is?
He's The Rock.
Very good. I'm so proud of you. Okay, so he is starring, I don't know if you knew this, Ariana, that he is starring in a movie called Black Adam. It is a DC movie, so like in the DCEU universe, so Batman, Superman, Joker, those types of characters, right? So he's starring as Black Adam, which is kind of the anti-Shazam, if you will. Very basic description there, okay?
Okay.
So he's having his own movie come out. And anyway, so Dwayne Johnson has shed most of the apprehension behind announcing a Henry Cavill cameo. However, it is all but confirmed. So we are expecting a Superman appearance in a Shazam villain movie. Not sure what to expect on if he'll. I mean, I've seen rumors that he'll be wearing the blue and red suit, but that's like the more, you know, classic look. However, I have also heard that there's possibility of the black suit, which there's significance from the comics for that. So we'll see how that rolls. John Carpenter has voiced interest in making a Dead Space film. Do you know what Dead Space is?
Nope.
It is a horror video game. Now you know. So he says, quote, "That would make a real great movie. I could do that." John Carpenter is known for his obsession with video games and love for the art form, more than any other director in Hollywood. Dune Part 2 has a release window now of November 2023.
Very, very cool.
Yep. In sad news this week, Robbie Coltrane, he's a comic performer who's played several iconic characters, including Hagrid from Harry Potter, died at age 72. When I saw the news on Reddit this week, I was like, oh, that's really sad. Hagrid is probably one of... he's definitely in the top tier of my Harry Potter favorites. Do you have a favorite scene of Hagrid?
You know, Hagrid has plenty of good scenes, but my favorite is definitely the introductory one where he just breaks through the door with his pink umbrella, looking so just big and powerful and gruff, and yet even in that first little scene he's charming and funny, and I don't know. That's probably my favorite scene, just that introduction. Like, this is Hagrid, and he portrayed that so perfectly, and definitely was what I had imagined from reading the books.
Right? I definitely feel the same way. Another one of my favorite scenes is probably when he's carrying what he assumes to be a dead Harry. There's so much emotion, and Robbie did such a good job in portraying that. Moving on to some dumb news, NVIDIA canceled the cheapest of its new PC graphics cards, the RTX 4080 12GB model, now only leaving the expensive and huge models. Again, NVIDIA making a long line of poor choices. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to last week's podcast yet, but so the graphics card that that you have in your computer, and I have one on my computer, the newest models are as big as an Xbox, like literally as big as an Xbox.
That's pretty massive.
Yeah, and the smallest and most affordable one is now canceled in favor of the more expensive and just truly massive ones.
I imagine they'll lose some customer base there.
Yep. And that's something we talked about and touched in last week's episode. If you haven't listened to that, definitely recommend that. And moving into Star Wars news, Phase 2 of Star Wars The High Republic, which is a media, specifically a comic book and book storyline that they're running right now, is moving into Phase 2, and they released some concept art from the New York Comic Con this last little bit. It includes a very young looking Yaddle with it looks like just super young. I don't know, it's really weird to see. We've seen a concept art of a young, or very much younger Yoda, probably 200-year younger Yoda, but he looks just not so wrinkly. And it makes a big difference. Then with Yaddle, there's no wrinkles and colored hair and the whole nine. Very interesting.
Yeah, see, I can't even imagine that. I'll have to take a look.
Yeah, definitely worth looking at the concept art. They have a lot of really cool stuff going on in that. We've read one of the High Republic books. I think it was the introduction book, where it has the hyperspace accident in it. Definitely a good book. Definitely worth checking out. So just the High Republic in general is going to lead to several other projects that are going to be coming up in the Star Wars lineup, whether it be comic book, or movie, or TV for that matter. Lastly, we have the second arc of the Andor Disney Plus show has been completed, leaving us with a visual wonder and a thrilling arc closure. What are your thoughts on that last episode?
I thought it was awesome. Definitely was intense. I was sitting at the edge of my seat. My heart was pounding.
And your watch even said your heart was racing and you were not moving.
Yeah, my watch does that sometimes. I
Yeah.
get really into what I'm watching. Andor's been really interesting because it'll have those two build-up episodes that are a little slower, and then this huge finale in the third episode.
That always pays off.
Always. It's been fantastic. And I found that I had become really attached to these characters. I was really surprised at some of the choices that they made. And I was really surprised at the loss of Nemec, and really sad. It was a big payoff in general, though. I really, really enjoyed that last episode.
Yeah, I mean, it was really sad with Nemec because, he got through all of the fighting, and it wasn't until they took off that, the thing that they were stealing just, that was the final straw there. That was hard.
That was so sad.
Yeah. So, what did you think of the eye?
It was gorgeous. Visually just stunning. It was beautiful. It was beautiful when they were looking at it from the ground. It was fabulous while they were flying through it. I was really impressed.
Yeah. It was really fun to see, the heist going on, and you'd be going back and forth between the more religious Aldani people and their sacred valley right outside the Imperial base, and that created a lot of tension, but it was showing the eye from their perspective, and it was just so, I wasn't expecting it to be that cool. Had all of those colors, and It was really cool when they were flying through the eye, and the TIE fighters were getting wiped out, and it was just all around them.
Yeah, they really hyped it in those 2 episodes about how great it was, and it was that great.
Yeah, I was a little bit taken back by Scheme, his choice. So, I mean, in the earlier 2 episodes, he was very much, this is the team effort here. And, he had said to Cassian that he was trying to get revenge, but it was always on a team level and the rebellion level. Then the second he had the opportunity, he wanted to have personal revenge and, take 40 million credits and run. If he could fly that ship, he probably would have taken all 80 million credits.
For sure.
How do you think Cassian handled that situation?
I wasn't really surprised when he shot him, actually. Once the conversation started and it progressed the way that it did, I was like, oh man, I don't know what he's going to do, but I think he might have to shoot him. So when he did, I was like, well, that's a shame, but I saw that coming.
Yeah, you can shoot people in, like, the limbs, especially in the leg, and in Star Wars, they're out of commission, but they're not dead. But, that was what appeared to be a kill shot. In Rogue One, Cassian talks about, having done all these terrible deeds in the name of the rebellion, although he's not officially a part of the rebellion, he's just getting paid for it right now. But you can definitely see how that's starting, between just Andor or Cassian's himself kill count so far.
And he's a very hardened character.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of soft and sweet to him. He's lived a lot of life. It's really hardened and jaded him.
Yeah, getting taken away from his home, as a teenager.
And everything he experienced before he left.
And a tribe of little kids. Who knows what they went through, and maybe they saw all their parents die, and who knows? We don't know. But definitely he's seen some stuff and not the better for it. So with that, we have Nemik's manifesto in Cassian's possession. How do you think that's going to affect him?
Well, obviously I don't know, but I think that he had developed enough of an emotional connection with him that he will definitely read it. And it'll probably take him a bit. I don't think he's going to be like, oh man, this is it. I'm in 100%. I believe in the rebellion now and I'm going to do it. I think it'll take him a minute, but I think he will take the time to read it. And I think it will change his perspective.
Yeah, I definitely think this will be the catalyst, if you will, of where we see him now to the beginning of his journey into embracing the rebellion. And yeah.
I'd be curious to see what role that manifesto plays in the rebellion in general, whether it's his own thing that he wrote on his own or whether it's adopted into the wider rebellion.
That's a great question. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. We know that it's going to affect Cassian at some level. We don't know how deep, but on Star Wars Explained YouTube channel this week, Alex from the show specifically mentioned that we've had a backtrack of from A New Hope. We have Luke and Leia and Han and the whole rebellion that we see there getting the Death Star plans. Then in Rogue One we see the crew that were able to get the Death Star plans and that sacrificed themselves to get the Death Star plans to the rebellion. And now we're seeing with Nemik that here's the idea of the rebellion, because it's not fully formed yet, getting passed into someone that will be in the rebellion. So it's very interesting to see how that the idea will eventually become into the full-fledged rebellion that we know from A New Hope.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that process.
Yeah. Tony Gilroy, the creator of the series and director, writer, he did say that episode 7 will be an interesting episode and will be its own episode arc. Then we'll have a 3-episode arc again, then a 2-episode finale, I believe, to round out the last 6 episodes of this first season. They'll be very interested. I'm excited to everything that they have to present. I'm really digging this series.
Yeah, this is another one, like Rings of Power, where I was kind of skeptical at first. Like, well, we'll see how it goes. And it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed every episode.
Yeah, I mean, when they first announced it, was it 3-4 years ago now? I can't remember. 3, probably. I liked Rogue One, and I do like Rogue One, but it was like, do we really need an episode or a show all about Cassian? Like, what story is there to tell? And now it was like, I'm so glad we have this story just with these 6 episodes that we have because it's been so good.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's everything we have for the roundup and a little mini segment about Andor. We encourage everyone to follow us at the Nerd Chatter Show on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, Facebook, and you can find all of our episodes of the Nerd Chatter podcast anywhere you can find podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and more. If you're interested in becoming part of the community, you can join our Discord or head over to our Patreon, where we have Patreon-specific content for our supporters. If you're on YouTube, the links are in the description below for all the lightsabers that we talked about. And if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, you can head to our website, nerdchatter.com, for any of the links that you would need there. Ariana, my beautiful wife, thank you for joining me today in replacement of Don. Well, you can't replace him, but thank you. I appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.
Everyone, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.